Okay, is everybody ready? Does everybody have everything they need at the moment? Okay. So we're gonna start over again. I'm gonna welcome you. Thank you so much for coming and thank you for being understanding about driving from Berkeley this time of night and going through the Causeway and Davis. I know you've all done that, so you understand. Anyway, both of our speakers are here now. So I would like to start this evening by reading a land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional lands of the Nisenan people. We recognize and thank the indigenous stewards of this land, past, present, and future. With God's help, we agree to hold ourselves accountable to forming new and ongoing relationships of honor and respect with these lands and peoples. So does everyone have an agenda and a prayer for the ending? Okay, great. Okay, so recording is underway now, I believe.
Yes.
So, okay, so now I'm going to just say an opening prayer in the name of the Father, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Creator God, we walk this Lenten journey with immigrants, refugees, the impoverished, the hungry, the unemployed. We walk with those mourning, those enduring war and violence, those crying out for peace, and all of your creatures of the earth. We move toward the seemingly impossible, resurrection, a time of justice and peace. We walk, called forward through the darkness by the risen Christ. Come to us, Holy Spirit, remain with us, and enlighten our hearts as we gather together this evening. Amen.
Amen.
So Pope Francis has said, not paying fairly, not giving a job because you are only looking at how to make a profit, that goes against God. Catholic social teaching tells us that the economy must serve people, not the other way around. My father was involved in the formation of the United Auto Workers Union in the 1930s in Oakland. He told me that before the union, he remembers standing in crowds of unemployed people outside a manufacturing company, and of the company representative coming outside, scrutinizing the way people looked, and then shouting at people, you, not you, you, not you, you. And that was it. The rest of you go home. All his life, my father remembered the humiliation and loss of dignity he and the others felt when they were not selected. It was the injustice caused by the lack of respect that made him embrace the union. Tonight, we are very fortunate to have two speakers who will reflect on the dignity of work and the rights of workers. Our first speaker is Dr. Monica Marcelli-Chu, a professor of Theological Ethics at the Jesuit School of Theology of Santa Clara University, located in Berkeley. Her research areas include moral theology and Catholic social teaching. Dr. Marcelli-Chu's teaching is informed by her ministry, experience in diverse settings, as well as Ignatian principles and formation. Monica will speak on the history of the Catholic social teaching we are exploring tonight and how we can apply that teaching in our churches and everyday lives. Our second speaker is Wim Durst of Durst Organic Growers in Esparto. He has been the owner-operator since 1988. And I'm sure that many of you, like me, have for a long time been eating his delicious organic fruits and vegetables. He focuses not only on wholesome organic food and earth-friendly soil management, but he also believes it is his responsibility to provide a safe, supportive working environment for all those employed by Durst Organic Growers. Jim will share what his company has done and continues to do to promote the rights and dignity of workers. I'm going to ask that you save your questions until after both of our speakers have presented. And we have put paper and pen so you can write down, jot down any questions you might have so you won't forget. And then we hope that after they both finish their presentations, we'll be able to have a nice question and answer and discussion period. So I give you Monica.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me? Is that better? Okay. Thank you for having me. Sorry for delaying the start of the event. We did get caught in some traffic, but I'm very happy to be here with you this evening, to meet Jim as well. So I do have some slides. So talking today about dignity of work and the rights of workers, so I was asked to just share briefly some of the history of Catholic social teaching. You can skip right to slide 2. So we'll just give you a brief outline of what I'll do. We'll look at some biblical themes on creation first, and Catholic social teaching themes on human dignity and the common good that underlie a lot of Catholic social teaching on the dignity of work and workers. And then I'll be drawing on a number of different sources as we go, and especially on Pope Francis, but I will highlight Rerum Novarum and Laborem Exercens as 2 of the kind of foundational encyclicals on this topic. And then finally, we'll dive into some of the particulars on the rights of workers and some of the fruit of the teaching. So the human person is created in the image and likeness of God and is invited to work the soil. This is what the compendium of the social doctrine of the church tells us, and much of Catholic teaching tells us. So teaching on the Imago Dei puts us in relationship with God, with other persons, and with all creation. Our work should reflect this threefold relationship. So the unique role of the human person in creation is summarized in Laudato Si by Pope Francis. He writes, the Bible teaches that every man and woman is created out of love and made in God's image and likeness. This shows us the immense dignity of each person, who is not just something, but someone. He is capable of self-knowledge, of self-possession, and of freely giving himself and entering into communion with other persons. This immense human dignity, however, is not an invitation to domination over the earth and other creatures, right? Rather, dominion over the earth does not justify absolute domination. Rather, the goods of the earth are meant to be something that we receive as gifts. They were not created by us. We receive them as gifts and are something we have responsibility over. So the compendium writes, cultivating the earth means not abandoning it to itself. Exercising dominion over it means taking care of it, as a wise king cares for his people and a shepherd his sheep. And Francis continues a lot of this imagery. So we're meant to kind of tend to creation and care and steward creation as a shepherd tends to his flock. And this is the kind of governance that we're meant to have, in keeping with human dignity and the good of the earth. Work is essential, is what Catholic social teaching tells us, but it is not our ultimate end. So one must not succumb to the temptation of making an idol of work, for the ultimate and definitive meaning of life is not to be found in work. Work is essential, but it is not God. Sorry, work is essential, but it is God and not work who is the origin of life and the final goal of man. Important to have where you put the emphasis on these things. Work is essential, but it is God that is our ultimate end, not our work. So this invokes what we can call classically exitus and reditus schema, right? That's just a fancy way of saying all creation is from God and all creation is on a journey of returning to God. We, like all creation, are caught up or are meant to be caught up in that. So the human vocation finds its source and its end in this universal dynamic. And then we can move into how we think about this using our own kind of intellectual and appetitive inclinations. Wisdom speaks to the divine order in creation, but it begins in fear of the Lord. So this speaks to the human devotion to God, which is based on love of God. So it's this language of fear of the Lord, but it's actually an affective response to God. It's a movement of awe, of reverence. Justice then proceeds from fear of the Lord and from wisdom, and it precedes a concern for profit. We have the gifts of the Spirit and virtues being invoked here, that kind of set the scene. There are just our dispositions, how we are to approach creation as human agents. So there's something shared with all creation, but there's also something unique about the human person. Both what is shared and what is unique stem from the Creator. Finally, Sabbath rest is what calls us to return to this dynamic of receiving everything from God and from the earth, and recalling the purpose of our work. So there's this need to be caught up in the return to God. So while we're already on this journey, we can forget, right? We kind of leave this exitus reditus schema. So the idea is to become caught up back in it, remembering our place within all creation. Rest, Sabbath rest, provides an opportunity for this. It gives us time for gratitude. It gives us time for worship. It also cultivates a defense of the poor and resistance to every kind of exploitation, what is hidden and what is evident. So it's a return as we cultivate gratitude and cultivate worship. It's a chance to rest. It's also a chance to reflect. What are the practices? How are we serving the poor? How are our systems, our structures, our economics actually doing this work of caring for every human life? So we have a duty to work, and this is a call to be involved in the world. So the awareness that the form of this world is passing away is not an exoneration from being involved in the world, and even less from work, which is an integral part of the human condition, although, as we just saw, not the only purpose of life. So if work is a right, the Catholic tradition often speaks, or not only the Catholic tradition, philosophy also often speaks, where there is a right, there is a corresponding duty or an obligation. Right? So work as right also means that there is a corresponding duty. We need to participate in this. Work is not everything, but it is essential. It's a fundamental way in which we enter into relationship with others and with society at large. It's a fundamental way in which we live the unique human vocation to govern not only ourselves, but all creation. So we are called into the world and into the world of work. Gaudium et Spes and during Vatican II, Populorum Progressio just shortly after, repeatedly insists on this importance of the human and Christian involvement in the world. So spirituality is not to call us out of the world, but rather into the world. So discerning the signs of the times in the language of Gaudium et Spes, combating poverty, building a more communal society, increasing awareness of human rights, all of this is part of the Christian vocation. Or as Populorum Progressio describes, when work is done in common, when hope, hardship, ambition, and joy are shared, it brings together and firmly unites the wills, minds, and hearts of people. So we can note here the personal nature of work. It calls forth our creativity. It calls us into relationship. We enter into relationship with those with whom we work, and hopefully with the broader society. It's kind of our way of mediating our purpose. But work also helps us to become a people, right? So it's not just an individual holding my rights. It's also meant to be done something, and it's meant to be done in common. It makes us a people. So the common good. I thought to kind of pause. This is a little broader than thinking about work, but it underlies so much of it. So the common good is both a personal and a social reality. So the key definition we get from Gaudium et Spes says that the common good is the sum of those conditions of social life which allow social groups and their individual members thorough and ready access to their own fulfillment. So it's social groups, which is made up of individuals. But the individual is not understood just kind of solely as this pure physical entity that stands apart from others, right? The individual contributes to what is good for us. Society in its turn should be structured so that each of us can contribute and maximize the flourishing of each member. Laudato Si picks this up and describes that underlying the principle of the common good is respect for the human person as such, endowed with basic and inalienable rights, order to his or her integral development. So we have this word integral. So it means creating and protecting conditions in which our family life, our social life, our political life, our vocation, our cultural ends, all of these need to be pursued so that we can be one whole flourishing human body and in relationship with other persons. And as Francis keeps repeating, this includes protection of the environment. And this isn't only in the sense of that there are goods of the environment that are goods that we share as human persons or in human society, but he's also inviting us, I think, to expand our thinking on the common good, so that we're also asking what is good for the ecosystem with which we are in relationship, right? So as to not make these competing goods, we should be asking what is good for the environment and what is good for us, and hearing the cry of the poor and the cry of the earth together. And so I think really expanding our imagination when we think common good, what are the realities to which that moves us? So finally, to the second part. So looking at two of the key encyclicals on Catholic social teaching on work. So it's in the context of the Industrial Revolution that the official tradition of Catholic social teaching begins, and it begins with work. Rerum Novarum, written 1891, encyclical by Pope Leo XIII on capital and labor. So I thought to set the scene, though it was quite some time ago, I still think it's worth, this is kind of the beginning, the seeds of it. So I thought I'll read the first paragraph, give us a chance to pause, and I invite you to reflect on, as you hear it, to reflect on its timeliness. How does it sound today? So that the spirit of revolutionary change, which has long been disturbing the nations of the world, should have passed beyond the sphere of politics and made its influence felt in the cognate sphere of practical economics is not surprising. The elements of the conflict now raging are unmistakable. In the vast expansion of industrial pursuits and the marvelous discoveries of science, in the changed relations between masters and workmen, in the enormous fortunes of some few individuals, and the utter poverty of the masses, the increased self-reliance and closer mutual combination of the working classes, as also finally in the prevailing moral degeneracy. The momentous gravity of the state of things now obtaining fills every mind with painful apprehension. Wise men are discussing it, practical men are proposing schemes, popular meetings, legislatures, and rulers of nations are all busied with it. Actually, there is no question which has taken deeper hold on the public mind. So this is 1891. It sounds like it's time, but also, I mean, sometimes, yeah. So as we look at the development of Catholic social teaching on work, we see this question of industrial development give way to questions of progress, development, and human rights. This gives way to the question of ecological destruction and the destructive effects of a global mindset that is not discerning in its values, and the uneven distribution of the goods of the earth, and the uneven cost of who is bearing the cost of ecological destruction. So we see these moves, but we can already see, I think, the seeds of this is already, a lot of it is already present, even in Rerum Novarum. So this encyclical intervenes at a time when the world of work is being transformed, right? There are impacts on political, economic, and social life. There's a transition from agricultural to industrial society in city centers. This means the organization of labor by industry is changing. And as the compendium later describes, the encyclical doesn't itself use the language of it being capitalistically oriented, but you can kind of see that is what it's pushing towards, and it's noticing these trends. So there's new forms of the organization of labor by industry, and it's oriented towards increase of profit. So while it speaks, so there's new questions of justice in light of the exploitation of workers that's made possible by this new industrial process. So the encyclical affirms the dignity of workers, the right to private property, talks about cooperation among social classes, the rights of the weak and the poor, obligations of workers and employers, and the right to form associations. So while it speaks the language of its time, it examines questions of justice and injustice on the ground. It enjoins cooperation and mutual obligation. It sows seeds of later teaching on subsidiarity. So this is going to be saying what can be done at the local grassroots level, should be done at the local grassroots level, and gradually kind of increase as questions increase in complexity. So we continue to also increase our structures and have communication between those. But we have the seeds of this thinking already here. And it also places the question of workers right at the heart of the social question of the church. Later teaching will build on this foundation. It will further develop the personal character of work, that each person has the right to the fruits of his or her labor, that work should allow the creative expression of a personality. So we shouldn't just be cogs in a machine. I should see the fruit of some of my labor. Verum Novarum focuses its concern on socialist approaches. This is so as to safeguard rights. The critique of capitalism in Catholic social teaching emerges, however, from this very same foundation. There's a gradual recognition of any system that left unchecked will dehumanize and depersonalize as it subjects individuals to the system rather than the other way around. Right? So there is this building critique, whether it's a socialist or a capitalist approach, that any system that will subject the individual to the system rather than making sure the system is working for the individual, that this depersonalizes and dehumanizes. So the organization of labor as the organization of society, so we see kind of the coherence with teaching on the common good, is for the person. So how labor is organized, how society is organized should be for the person. Once this is forgotten, it is no longer an organization of labor as the work of human hands, but rather it becomes a system abstracted from the reality of workers and the question of their integral development as human persons. So we saw if work is our way into society, it's a way into building those relationships. The question of how it's organized can't be abstracted from the day-to-day reality. Laborum Exercens in 1981, so 90 years later, on the anniversary of Verum Novarum, John Paul II again reflects on human work. So here we have this language of thinking about the subjective and objective aspects of work. So while the objective dimension refers to the human calling to exercise dominion over the earth, so this is what we saw at the beginning, it's this theological anthropology, it's the grand vision, the grand narrative that applies to all. This work is ultimately done by a person or a subject. So the human vocation to work is both objective and subjective. But it is the subjective aspect that especially gives work its dignity. So the purpose of work is the human person and not the other way around. So again, it's constantly this kind of back and forth, right? So the purpose of work is for the person rather than the other way around. So human work not only proceeds from the person, it's not only what we do, but it's also meant to be essentially ordered back to the person and has its final goal in the human person. So it should be a human system, quite literally. And work, again, like the common good, is both personal and social. So we work with and for others, not only who are bosses, but also the sense of larger society. We work to take care of ourselves, our families, to contribute. This is supposed to be the idea, right? It's how we participate in the common good. So finally, just to the last part, to reap some of the fruits of these foundations on the dignity of work and person, and to consider the rights of workers. So there's the right to participation. So this is in ownership, management, and profits. So the right to participation includes intermediate bodies, and also participation in the means and processes of production. So obviously we don't all own companies, but the idea is that we should have some say. This is that language of having some sense of the fruit of our labors. We should be able to see something, have some sense of where this work is going, what its purpose is, opportunities to participate in some form in management, be able to have a just wage from that. And opportunities, I think, also to move within corporations. Is there ability, if I start on the ground, are there opportunities to move into management? Like, what are those, like, it's this kind of, this is the thinking. So it doesn't mean we all have the exact same role, but there should be different forms of participation and different possibilities. Then we turn to the right to private property. But importantly, the universal destination of goods always comes before private property. So the right to private property, as Popular and Progressio wrote, is not absolute and unconditional. No one may appropriate surplus goods solely for his own private use when others lack the bare necessities of life. So that is to say, Francis is not the first to be making this critique. It came quite a while ago. So, but as he continues in Laudato Si, the natural environment, Francis writes, is a collective good, the patrimony of all humanity and the responsibility of everyone. If we make something our own, it is only to administer it for the good of all. So we enjoy the fruit of our labor as participants, kind of getting that first sense, but also we should have the ability to share with others. And finally, also to have the right to rest from work, and kind of recalling that Sabbath logic at the beginning. And so the idea there kind of calling us back in to the exitus reditus scheme and kind of circling that program. So just to list off some of the rights of workers commonly named, and all of these based on human dignity, right? So a just wage. Wage should correspond to the cost of living. It should be commensurate with what each person needs to live a dignified life. While wages will not be the same from person to person, there is this basic sense of justice that each person should be paid for their labor in a manner that enables them to obtain what they need, right? So they should be able to have what they need for themselves and for their family and their dependents. They should have housing, they should have food, they should have healthcare. So a just wage. Rest, we have this primary meaning again of the Sabbath. This is allowing the people and also the land to rest. And we can also get other biblical enjoyments here that tell us to kind of leave leftovers behind for others, right? So we don't glean every single last crop. We leave a little bit for those who kind of come a little bit later. So there's this sense of rest for ourselves, but also for the land, and this not constantly needing to operate as if we need more and more. There is a pause. A healthy work environment. So this means not only being in a physical space that's safe and sanitary, but also humane in an interpersonal sense, right? It should be a healthy work environment. We should like to be there. We should be in communication with other people. The protection of personality, conscience, and personal dignity. Subsidies when necessary for the unemployed and for their families. There should be pension, insurance, and social security for old age, sickness, injury, maternity, and the right to form associations. So I think all of these kind of creating just a human and a humane context for our work. So last but not least, I thought I'd turn to Francis and Fratelli Tutti and see how his reflection and teaching on migrants it confirms much of what we see in earlier teaching, but I think it also is challenging the church and society to witness to a particular area of need of where this isn't being lived out. So the opening quote, he writes, migrants are not seen as entitled like others to participate in the life of society. And it is forgotten that they possess the same intrinsic dignity as any person. Hence, they ought to be agents in their own redemption. So he speaks about a duty of hospitality. So this is speaking to the host community, right? To the one on the receiving end in terms of where the migrants are coming. So speaking to the host community, there's a duty of hospitality. If I have reaped the fruits of the earth in a disproportionate way, I now also have a duty to be hospitable to those coming. But on the other side, there's also this recognition of reciprocity. So the host also is the one who receives, right? So migrants aren't just coming to take, migrants are also coming to give. So there's a duty of hospitality and a recognition of reciprocity, that we're being placed in relationship. And so again, it's relationship with the earth, relationship with God, relationship with others. It is always relationship. And that means there needs to be a sense of agency, enablement, and empowerment on both sides. This is especially important, I think, for Francis in light of the sins of globalization, how this has created situations of injustice that have put certain people on the move. Right? So certain people have had to bear the brunt of ecological destruction more than others. This is causing them to be on the move. Then this is also something that requires acknowledgement. So there's a particular call to care for the young, particularly as those most likely to be on the move as they look for work and security, but also for the elderly, for the disabled, for the disenfranchised. So all those on the margins who aren't as free to participate in the structures that others are. So he writes, fraternity is born not only of a climate of respect for individual liberties, or even of a certain administratively guaranteed equality. Fraternity necessarily calls for something greater, which in turn enhances freedom and equality. And what is that something greater, or the magis, as I'm trained to ask in my Ignatian training? So for Francis, it's social friendship and universal fraternity necessarily call for an acknowledgement of the worth of every human person, always and everywhere. Thank you.
But he thought all that out.
That's what I'm paid to do.
I thought maybe I'd start out by just giving you a little history of who I am and where our farm is. We're located in western Yolo County, right up against the foothills at the mouth of the Capay Valley. So we're not in the Capay Valley, so we don't have to deal with all the casino traffic that people who live up there do. And we're actually in a little bit of God's own country over there. It's really pretty right now, right up against the foothills. And I was born and raised in this area, Yolo County. It's called Hungry Hollow. And I was taught by my parents that sharing was a part of rural living. My wife, Deborah, and I began farming organically in Hungry Hollow in the late 80s, excuse me, and currently farm about 800 acres of vegetables, grain, and hay. We sell our produce into the wholesale and retail markets across the country, but mainly try to keep our product on the West Coast so it arrives fresh. We believe farms play a role in keeping our communities healthy. By sharing our time and farm resources with them, we believe each person has an innate right to access healthy and nutritious food. I remember as a young child and riding with my 5 other brothers and sisters in the back of a Ford Country Squire station wagon, coming from school and my mom driving, and she came across Cache Creek, and there was a family camped in their car on a little turnout by the creek. And my mom pulled in there, and there was a mom and a dad and 3 young kids in the car, and they were actually living in their car. And I remember my mom taking us all home, and then she goes into the pantry and starts loading up food off of the shelves and takes it back to the family and gives them some food. And those kind of actions made lasting impressions on a bunch of kids. And I think in some ways we have lived that out through our whole lives. And we do this by sharing the bounty of our farm with everybody, including the Yolo Food Bank. We're big contributors to the food bank. Food banks traditionally have been the recipient of food that has no other place to go in our food distribution system. It's the end stop. And that is not the way we were taught about sharing food. Food is something everybody has a right to have access to. And we started giving to the food bank in the mid-90s, and there's been years when we've given hundreds of thousands of pounds of tomatoes and squash and melons and things that are coming off our farm fresh, because that's the only way we have of filtering our produce into the communities. And I was on the board of the Yolo Food Bank. I was for 13 or 14 years, and I really saw firsthand. And then our church, we have a food distribution every Sunday right after our worship service. And we probably, Esparto's a small rural town. We probably have 50 to 60 people every week, 52 weeks a year out there. And the whole distribution is right now is pretty much being run by people who used to be in line. So they've taken responsibility for not only getting what they need, but sharing it with other people. I believe there are 2 opposing stories or myths at work in the world. One is based upon the understanding that this planet contains abundance for all if we share what we have and take no more than what we need. An economy of sharing and goodwill. The other story is based upon the understanding that resources are scarce. This understanding drives us to gather and hoard all that we can get at the expense of others and the planet's ecosystem. This understanding justifies the division of wealth around the world, where 1% of the people own and control 50% of the wealth. This understanding is the basis of colonialism, aggression, greed, and war upon each other and our planet. I'm a firm believer that the abundance story is the only true reality. This belief sets the stage on how we operate our farm, how we engage in our community, and how we live our lives. For us, it is the basis for happiness and fulfillment. It is also the basis for our belief in farming practices that honor the natural processes of our planet and its ability to sustain itself since the beginning of time. On our farm, it means practices that build and enhance soil life, including cover cropping, crop rotation, minimum and reduced tillage practices, water management, and soil amendments. It means selecting crops that provide nutrition and flavor to our customers. It means caring for our employees with a very livable wage, health care, and safe working conditions. It means providing them with the appropriate tools to perform their work. It means making a sustainable profit from our crop sales to allow all the above to happen. It means understanding that processes and practices are ever evolving and understanding as our understanding grows. Stagnation is the first nail in the coffin of any business. And lastly, it means celebrating the abundance by sharing. We try to practice the gospel in our work, in our farm. And we don't proselytize, we act, we do it. We try to treat each other with respect. And this has been a growing process for us. It's not something like you just start one day and say, oh, I'm going to start treating everybody this way and I'm going to respect everybody. It happens through growth, and it happens through, I think, the universe teaching us how we need to treat and be in community with each other. The whole notion of employer and employee automatically creates this level of separation that allows us to not be able to really have empathy and understanding for one another. I have a young woman who was working on our farm. She was working on our packing shed, and she worked for 1 year. I didn't know her name. And the next year, and she was folding boxes. That basically, we have to put our produce into boxes, and those boxes come flat. So we have people who form them so that the people packing can put them in the boxes, put the fruit in the box. And so one day I was over there, somebody wanted something and I needed to get a box. So I was over there at their table and I was struggling with it. Some of these boxes are like little erector sets. You got to figure out how they go together. And so I was struggling with it, and she comes over and she goes, would you like to help? Would you like me to help you? And I go, please. I say, what is your name? My name's Guadalupe. And so she folded it up like in 3 seconds. And I'm wondering who the real boss is here. Who really knows what they're doing? Afterwards, I came to realize that this person has been here working for me for always over a year now, and I didn't even know their name. And so those little teaching moments, I think that where life teaches us that you have to be present to the relationship all the time. People are more respectful of your presence than they are of the check that you write for them every week. And so the next day, I walk by, and every time after that, I walk by, I go, "Good morning, Guadalupe." "Good morning." I mean, we kind of like became best friends. And she's probably 40 years younger than me, but it was a way of, I learned from these relationship lessons that life teaches us. And I think that as an employer, it's very important for us to always be cognizant that the person on the other end of the conversation has a life. They're living creatures. They have worries. They have problems. They have kids. Their kids have problems, and their car doesn't start. So our Deborah and I look at our job as being maybe the elders. We're probably the oldest. No, we're not the oldest. I'll tell you that story in a minute. But we're kind of like the elders, and the people we work with, we train them two things. One is that every job they do is of utmost importance to the success of the farm. And that job that they do, they are professional at what they do. If she put that box together like in 10 seconds, that's a professional work. That's not something that anybody in this room could even begin to mimic. And the other part is that in doing their work as an owner or as an employer, we need to respect them, our employees, and provide them the opportunity to be the best they can be. And we have to be their mom and dad. We have to be their employer. We have to be their counselor. We have, at our farm, when we begin to take that consideration, our farm works more like a community, like something that's a living creature, an organism. Then I said to myself, "Dang, should have known that earlier," because farms are living organisms. And if we just, so I gotta get a drink of water here. So, our employees mimic the real world. You have some who think they're right all the time. All the time. And I've been through at least 5 or 10 of those in management positions, and they no longer work at our farm. It's not that they didn't know what they were doing and they weren't sharp. They didn't honor their comrades. They didn't honor the other employees. And as much as I tried to teach people that is an essential component of being a supervisor. If you don't do it, pretty soon you're not going to be working there anymore. Because nothing breaks apart the work community faster than individuals who think they're always right. And they have the only pathway to operate. The other part of that is everybody needs to see our farm work community just as that, as a community. Every job is essential. You don't look down on somebody because they're digging a hole with a shovel, or you don't look down on somebody because they're sweeping the floor. Every job is essential, and we need to have respect. It's probably up in those, in Monica's work there. She put out the theory, and I'm going to tell you about the practice, because the practice is where the rubber meets the road. Everybody can understand the theory, but what does that really mean? How do we work that into our community? Saint Francis came from a wealthy family. He was an honorable person, and he developed an empathy for the natural world and for all the creatures. And, he treated life with respect. And if we're going to learn, that's the way organic farms are. That's what the word organic means. It doesn't refer to manure. It refers to the processes of living in this world together with the natural environment. And, he was like the Siddhartha of the Catholic Church. And I think that there's something about people who come from wealth and are able to walk away from it because they've seen something that may be more fulfilling. I'm not sure what that is, but that happens. My wife and I don't have any kids. People ask me, well, do you have a family? I go, yeah, I have 175 members in our family. And they're all important. And I try to look at them through the eyes of our offspring, because they don't know this yet, but they're going to inherit a farm one day. You have a slide up there talking about how do people progress in their work? When do the workers become the owners? At what point does that happen? It happens when the owners recognize the value and they say no to past patterns of passing the farm on to their children who may have any desire at all to farm, and surpassing the employees who have worked on that farm for 40 years. There's some injustice there that's going on in the way our agricultural system passes its wealth on to the next generation. For the first 10 years or 12 years of our business, we struggled with this health insurance thing. And it's a mandate pretty much that you have to provide health insurance, but it's a mandate if you're going to tap into good employees and you want them to work with you. Health insurance is really important because medical care is so expensive. And every year we would buy this policy that would have deductibles so high that people, our employees, wouldn't use it because they couldn't afford the deductibles. So we sat down with our insurance agent one year and we say, this is not working for our farm. We need to come up with another program. So we actually, they had a good idea. They had this program called EDIS, and we have Blue Shield. Blue Shield picks up a certain percentage of your cost, and then the secondary insurance company picks up 90% of the balance. So if you're an employee and your kids need braces, it costs you like $100. And it's like, how did we not know this sooner? And how did we not make it affordable? How could we not try to afford? We go out and spend $300 and some thousand for one tractor. But our insurance policy every year runs us like 100. Our insurance costs for health insurance for our employees runs us like 120. I can't work without the tractor, but I can't work without my employees. So this kind of balancing system is always something we're struggling with. And the only cog in the gear is when the government tries to tell you how to care for your employees. We were putting water in the fields, ice water and shade for 10 or 15 years prior to the state of California mandating it. And then the water has to be so many feet from the employee, and the shade has to be so accessible under a certain degree. You can't use shade cloth. It has to be solid shade, because shade cloth if you guys knew what farms have to go through on the labor compliance portion, you would throw up your hands and say, this doesn't make sense. And a lot of it doesn't. The laws for labor are being created by bureaucracies. They're not being created by the people who actually work in the field. They're not even consulted. And so there's a little bit of frustration in my voice. It has to do with our government creating an unfair playing field. And it gets back to the point of making enough money to be able to fund the benefits that we want to supply and the wages that we want our employees to have. So if we don't make enough money it's all just futile. So we have to be high end. We have to be out thinking our competitors. We have to get our stuff in the marketplace. We have to sell volume. We came up with an incentive program in 2000, thanks to Gregory Belikoff from the University of California, Davis. And it's an incentive program. Every year, people come to the farm and say, we need to make more money. Every year, we need to make more money. Well, costs keep going up. So we're trying to figure out, well, how can we pay more money? I don't like paying minimum wage. It's kind of, at that time, it was like $5 or $7. It was really minimum. And he helped us put together an incentive program where people automatically made the minimum wage. But if they were able to piece rate, if they were able to pick a certain number of cartons, then they got so much dollars per carton. Now we knew what our costs were for picking a box of tomatoes. It was like, at that time, it was probably like the harvest cost for harvesting was $2. And the minimum wage was $6. So we said, aha, we'll pay you $3 a box for every box you do over and above minimum wage. So finally, people's ideas changed because they can now come to work and they can make $20 an hour. They can make $25 an hour. It didn't change our cost of labor one bit. Our cost per box for harvest stayed flat. They earned the money because they put out the effort. And the only thing that we had a problem with is making take their lunch breaks and their breaks because they didn't want to stop because they knew that they could earn money. And we had people making $400 and $500 a day. That, oh my God. Prior to that, we're making $80 a day. So to me, it became a win-win situation. It's good for the farm, and it's also the employees could participate in that. And when one person can pick enough boxes, pretty soon you don't need 150 employees out there. You can have 70 employees pick the same amount of required boxes. So it reduces your overhead and it reduces the cost of your labor. It reduces the amount of people you have in the field. Everybody requires a certain level of management. So it reduces the management energy. And so these are the kind of things as farmers and at our farm, how can we provide a living wage? How can we provide benefits that people can and will use? And how do we give, the next question to us, how do we give them more time off? Well, if people make more money per hour, they don't necessarily need to work 60 hours a week. And then the state of California and all this benevolence decided to start reducing the number of hours that farm workers could work in the field. So it went from 60 hours down to 40 hours. And if anything over 40 hours is time and a half, and anything over 60 hours, excuse me, anything over 50 hours is time and is double time. So, you know, then I said, darn, we just kicked ourselves in the butt because we're paying these people $25 an hour. And now I have to pay them, if I need them for overtime, before it used to cost me like $18. Now it's costing me $40. So, you know, it's the benefit of all that is that it's working in the fields is hard work. Farming is hard work. It doesn't, even sitting on a tractor for 10 hours a day is hard work. And if we can do things on our farm to make it a more humane place to work. I think somewhere up there it said on your thing is, you need your Sabbath. You need your rest time. You need your personal time. I look at the problems in the Hispanic community when we were growing up is because the parents were working 60 and 70 hours a week, and the kids were taking care of themselves at home. And that did not create a healthy family life. So that family life was suffering. Consequently, kids were joining gangs. They were doing things they shouldn't be doing, getting caught, going to jail. Then they're in that system. And so I think that that's farmers. We were trying, how can we care? We can't care for the whole world, but we can care for the people that we work with every day and responsible for. Bring to the last story and then I'll shut up. Guadalupe Salcedo came to work at our farm. He was 80 years old. He previously had worked for my uncle, and I didn't know this. He went to work for my uncle when he was a young man. He was the head of their irrigation. He was at least 6 feet, 6'2", probably a strapping young man at that time, carrying siphon pipes up and down muddy ditches, irrigating alfalfa. He came one day and he said, "Jim, do you have any work for me?" And I said, "Do I know you?" And he said, "Yeah, I used to work for your uncle, Paul Reed." And I said, "Yeah, and here he is. He's in his 80s and he probably weighs 120 pounds and he's 6 feet tall and his eyes are all bloodshot." And I said, "Well, the only thing I would like you to work in the packing house so you're not out in the field because there's some limitations on age." And so he started working folding boxes. And he worked for us for 4 years. And every year I kept saying, every winter he went back to Mexico because he had a place in Mexico and he had his friends and he'd go fishing. He had his things he liked to do, but then he would just come back. And every fall it was like, I kept looking down the road to see if see if he was coming down the road. And my cousin Mike Reef, he called me up, said, "He's coming. I just picked him up." He was walking from the bus station out to the farm. So, because he didn't have any transportation. And so in 2018, we gave him the honor of being the Employee of the Year. And it just kind of made his day. And he was so happy. And the next year, he decided he wasn't going to come back. And then he died. And I'm thinking, I don't think he died because he wore out, or he just died because he didn't have a purpose to go on. So I don't want to say anymore. That's kind of what we do on our farm, and let it go.
Okay, well, those were two good presentations that gave all of us a lot of food for thought. And I would just like to say, would that every farm owner was like you. Right. We wouldn't have as many issues. So we want to have a little bit of time for questions. Somebody is going to go around with the microphone. Who's Bob? Is that supposed to be me?
Volunteer.
Okay. Okay. Where is that other mic? Okay. So I'm going to ask the people in the room, when you ask a question, we want to be sure that the people on Zoom hear your question. So how do we facilitate that, Doug? Will they hear it through that
As long
mic?
as they speak directly into the
Okay,
mic.
so just speak directly into the mic with your questions and the Zoomers can hear it as well. And then Doug, how will you facilitate questions from the Zoomers?
Invited questions via chat, but we can also, if I should speak this into the mic.
Yeah.
So for folks on the Zoom call, if you have a question you'd like to ask verbally, let me know in the chat. We can do that, or you can just put your question in the chat. That works too. And I'll start with one that came through on Zoom. It was a question for Monica. There was reference near the beginning of your presentation to the compendium. But the questioner wanted to know, what was the compendium? They missed that. I did too, actually.
Yeah, it's a good example of the things you use all the time and forget to cover the bit. Yeah, and I'm trying to remember the year, but it's the Compendium of Social Doctrine of the Church. So I don't remember the year it was put together, but it's basically, it is exactly what it's titled. It is a compendium, so it stitches together all the social teaching. It's kind of grouped into different themes. So rather than having to read all of Verb Novum or all of Labrum Exercens on a topic, you have on a chapter on human work, and it will kind of walk you through the major themes. So that's what I was drawing on. So that's the compendium of the social doctrine of the church.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for your presentations. I have a question for Jim, and I was wondering, is there an association or collaboration between other organic farms in North California?
In relationship to labor or just,
I think, I'm just curious to see if there's an association of the organic farmers that band together to work out issues. Some issues that you talked about, healthcare, you talked about your employee relationships, you talked about, I would think marketing would be a big one, but.
there's no formal organizations. I mean, we're all certified organic through a certifying organization, but that organization is more like a business rather than anything in bringing farmers together. I think most of the dialogue happens out the window of our pickups when we pass on the street, or so a lot of us are involved in lots of different social activities too, that we all feel that we have a responsibility to build our communities up too, especially the rural communities. They were with the advent of the automobile and the urbanization, a lot of thriving small communities went belly up in the 60s, into the 70s, into the 80s, into the 90s. They became bedroom communities. And those people that moved there probably usually shopped in the urban areas and didn't shop in the rural areas. So the businesses in the rural areas didn't thrive. So I think a lot of our granting farms realize the importance of having a hardware store and a grocery store.
Right.
And just some of the basic things a restaurant. And I have one of my employees, and he says, well, you could get that cheaper at Amazon. And I said, no, Amazon has a cost too. I'd rather spend my money in town and let that dollar work in our community rather than go somewhere else just because it appears to be cheaper. That's your question.
I have a question for the group and for the panelists. First of all, an example, I went to a Franciscan church. I grew up in a Franciscan church in what used to be called Dakota. It's now called Union City. You might have known of it. It's in the Bay Area. Anyway, and it was in an area where there were a lot of very, very low income people. It was a farming area, and there were a lot of people that were very poor. And so what the Franciscans did at my church is they developed a credit union for the people there because they saw the people needed to be able to get loans. And so my question is, can you, either of you or any of you, think of what other kinds of things can people at churches do to help promote workers and the dignity of work?
Well, sharpen your pencils, because this is a long list. And it's as simple as things like, here's an example. 3 or 4 years ago, my wife and I bought this car because the price was good. It wasn't the car we needed. It was 20-year-old Toyota Corolla Camry, but it was in good shape. I said, well, it was $2,000. I said, well, why don't we just buy it? And then somebody's always needing a car. And so like, we kept it like for 3 years. And a couple people wanted to buy it from us. But I know what they wanted to do. They wanted to buy it and sell it because they thought they could make more money. And I didn't want to really, I wanted to have it there for people who really needed it. So we have this young woman who, and I have a number of people that work for me who have been through the criminal system. And my CFO spent 40 years in prison for murder. He's now working on our farm. I have 3 people who were meth addicts who are now clean and sober for numbers of years, and they've all turned into really good employees. One is this one young woman. She had been in drugs for quite a while. She and her husband were both shot when they were leaving a bar, and her husband died, and she made it. She had a belly wound, and she went to live with her mother, who was fairly invalid, and started taking care of her, started turning her life around. And she came up to me about 3 weeks ago and says, Jim, I have $4,000 saved up. Would you help me buy a car? And I said, I have one that I'll sell you for $2,000. It isn't brand new, but it's in good shape and it runs and it's very dependable. So we worked out a deal, and I sent it in. I had all the brakes fixed, and I made sure just that everything was working good on it. I sold it to her. The idea of, and Deborah says, I think what we're gonna do is take that money and buy another car. And we start this lending library, so to speak, of automobiles. Because cars are expensive, and if you look at farm workers coming out to the fields, they're not all driving new cars. So to answer your question, there's 100 ways that we could make life just a little easier for those that are on the bottom rung in our society.
Did you have any comment?
Just a thought is when I think creating spaces for people to come together, like that is what I think often if someone has to advocate for themselves at work, up against it, not everyone has grade and floor. So they're with their boss, right? So if people need spaces to come together, and I think if you have a parish where you have a group of people that have a common need, or you can invite others, but I think if you create the space for people to come together to organize, that gives agency, that gives a possibility of advocacy. So I think creating spaces, creating community, and being able to partner with, so maybe it's not the need in the parish, but is there a way that if the parish has a need that there's a local group that needs it, how do you get out there? How do you create that relationship and build that and create partnerships, create allieships?
So are there other
Let me-
questions? Yes.
I'm gonna turn this around a little bit, we've been talking about the rights of workers, and I think we tend to think in terms of those people who are maybe in a lower economic status situation. I have a friend 20 or more, 30 or 40 years ago, who was working for, I believe, Lockheed in Southern California. And he was also involved with the Newman Center, as was I. He ended up quitting because he did not want to participate in the military industrial complex with his work. He has since done fine for himself, probably not as good as if he had stayed with that. That leads to my somewhat philosophical question for you to respond to. For those people who maybe have decent jobs, maybe even great jobs, what responsibility do those people have in terms of looking at if their job has outcomes that might be detrimental to the common good? In terms of this had to do with making more machines or environmental deterioration, any of that kind of stuff. I'm just kind of curious to see what you and others think about whether we should take that bold move. I've always respected this person because I'm not sure I ever would have done it, and he's still a friend that I know, and I always tell him this meant a lot that you were able to basically say, hell no, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to do something that's going to make a better world.
I think, big question. I think, conscience. This is where, so I think, yes, that ideally, each workplace has that freedom of conscience. And so I think if someone is caught in a space where they are not able to freely be at work and be a flourishing person, then yes, ideally, if they have the ability to make a move, then by all means you make a move. But this is, I think, in terms of it's, yeah, so conscience, but also what is it, it would be case by case. What is that person's role? What are their means? So I think in this case, if the person was able to make a move, great. But I think there's plenty of situations where someone isn't free to make that kind of choice. And so I think it's a question of I mean, there's formal ways we think principles of double effect and how we kind of contribute. So it's what are, yeah, so there's formal and less formal ways, but I think at the end of the day, it comes down to conscience. How free is this person to move? And I mean, work is not everything. This is where that too. So what other organizations, what other communities, what are other avenues that I think each person, if they're feeling stuck in their place of employment and not freely contributing in a way that is respecting their personal flourishing, what are other spaces? And again, this is another, I think, a parish move. Like, what are the other communities? What are the spaces that can help this person contribute and find a community and maybe gradually make a change? That's the best I think I could do.
I just want to say that, Mark, what it makes me think of is this is why we do need government and regulations. Because think of, just like the work that you and Doug did at the air board. There were people that were working at places where they were being polluted by the company. And so if we didn't have the government to step in to say what we need to do something for the common will. So that's another important thing is people can't do everything on their own. I think that's really good for people to try to get together and do things, but that's why we come together as society. Do we have any other questions on Zoom, Doug?
No further questions on Zoom.
Okay. Okay, so
I have-
we'll finish. Oh, you have a question?
Yeah, no, it's not a question, it's a comment, just a quick comment. I have one more, Jim Durst story. In Yolo County, there's an organization called, Yolo Interfaith Immigration Network, and it used to be very, very, active, helping out, people living in the county. Used to help them with their DACA applications and pay their applications. And one of the things that we did was offer ESL classes out at Madison Migrant Center, which is right close to Esparto. And I was talking to Jim one day and I said, we struggle with attrition. The people start to come and they're really excited about the class. And then, about November or so, attrition sets in. And so we talked, I asked him, what could we do to really encourage people to come, to stay with the program? Because English is really important if you're working on a farm. It gives you an ability to move up the ladder too, if you can speak another language, English. And so Jim says, well, I would be willing to pay my employees to come to your English classes. Do you remember saying that, Jim? And so I thought, that's the first time I've ever heard a farmer say that. There are a lot of farmers in Yolo County. There are a lot of big farmers in Yolo County. And the fact that he was willing to do that, that's another example of how you can give back to not just your employees, but to society, and then they can give back to you as well. Another organic farm out there bought all of our teaching materials the first year we ran our program. And that was a really sizable donation, but they really, really believed in their employees enough to step up to the plate and do that. So we're very appreciative of our neighbors out in the valley.
I think I saw one more hand. Yeah, because it was almost time to finish, so.
Given some of the principles that were laid out with the dignity of workers, how can one reconcile working within the church, whether it's a parish or Catholic school, with not having some of those dignity of workers, whether it's maternity leave or just wage given the long hours that one works within many Catholic institutions? And that's a good question.
Advocate, and again, I think this is, and I know it's a simple, and I don't mean that simply, I mean that, what is said by many voices is louder than what is said by one voice. And so I mean that truly, I think that there is a lot of impetus within, and I mean, I'm a big fan of using the teaching, the challenge sort of thing, and I think, but when people, and I think that it is really, it comes back to creating the spaces for people to come together, because I think that it would be case by case, but if you are in an institution that is clearly not living according to its own mission and values, if you can, organize people to put pressure, if you can create some noise, there is, I think that is, what I think, so I think it is a matter of being organized, it is a matter of, have the principles, have the teaching and make the challenge, and do it in an organized fashion and be strategic. Like, I think that's my basic, yeah.
I have an idea. If you have a parish council, now we know that most parish councils have no authority, but they can make noises. So to me, that would be a place to bring it up, because it would be a group of people at the church where the school is located that make hair. Because I agree, you have to have a group of people, and that's the kind of stuff that should also be brought to the bishop. I know there have been some complaints about Catholic schools, about some other kinds of things that have gone on, and there have been some people that have had results. So that's what I can say, but you have to make a lot of noise about it. I think that's one of the things you're saying.
And can you find an example somewhere else where a neighboring bishop or a neighboring large institution has come up with a solution that you think is more like, so can you put pressure? So, well, can you make that ally? So kind of equalize the power play, but also, or can you find examples of like, oh, look, this is happening here, this is possible. Yeah.
I did actually hear at the staff meeting at the school here just on Friday that the superintendent of schools for diocese is very committed to some substantial raises in there, like it's coming down the pike. So it's, you know, having that person, I guess, and then again, encouraging at the separate schools, okay, talk to this person because she's really committed to that. So that was good to hear.
Don't stop talking about it. I think, oh, do we have one more question? That could be the last one.
Not so much a question, but just kind of a follow-up comment. And some of you may have heard this, and I've shared this before in terms of organizing, is sort of taking the sandwich approach, right? The grassroots approach is pretty put pressure up, but also starting from the top down. We did some of this with the diocese, the bishop's office, and others events, you know, where we started the bishop's office, but we also worked on the grassroots front to push the message of establishing more care for creation emphasis and focus, right? So it wasn't being heard. We didn't have a obviously action platform and plan at diocese level, and that's how we handled it. Like we bubbled it up from the parishioners, parish council, pastoral council, or social justice committee, parishioners, our pastors, socializing with other pastors, as well as going directly to the bishop and saying, hey, and bringing the teachings. You know, say, hey, yeah, the Pope over here is said this, you know, by the way. So anyhow, I just want to give some context. It's not an easy effort, but I wanted, you know, the sandwich approach is what I kind of suggest.
Thank you. I think that's really great.
I just want to make a comment. Does everybody know about CalCare or universal healthcare? Because one of the setbacks for all organizations is the cost to healthcare. And we're currently in a system, I'm a retired nurse of 30 years that has a lot of monies that are not going to the proper places. And there is a better way. And so I would recommend all of you go onto the CalCare site and learn about universal healthcare, because 33% off the top is going to insurance companies, the pharmaceuticals, and so much waste. And if we went to it, I know people don't like the word socialized medicine, but there is a better way, and the majority of other countries around the world are doing this. And it is time, and we are very fearful, but even it's all immigrants, it's all, every single person is included in that. And that would take pay and give it, you know, wages, and we could focus on workers' rights more, rather than always fighting when you have for, you know, healthcare rights and stuff, and getting monies for that. There's so much money that is pulled into that. So I would just recommend that. But I have one last question. Okay, I'm doing this this parade, St. Patrick's Day, and I want to ask you, Jim, I am trying to put go green messaging and making these poster boards. What is the best thing I should say to help for farmers to message about going sustainable agriculture? Is there a saying that you have to encourage your, your products?
Now you're making me think. I gotta. My favorite saying is that action removes the doubt that theory will not solve. And I think, I've been farming out there for 30 years and I have neighbors who are conventional farmers. And they drive by and I'm out there planting cover crops and they're spraying all the weeds in their fields. And I think, man, I've been doing this for 30 years and it isn't even catching on. Even with my neighbors,
Yeah.
I mean, but it's a trickle. It's a theory. When I said action removes the doubt, theory will not solve. It's that sometimes you just have to do it and see if it'll work for you. And you don't have to do it blindly. There's plenty of people out there, but there's lots of steps towards being a more resilient agriculture and having a softer footprint on this planet. There's lots of steps. And if you don't take any steps, then the grower is the loser.
That's a lot to put on a platter.
I know. I wanted to capture something about that, about sustainable agriculture in something, because I'm trying to do everything from transportation to water overuse to, biodiversity, and I'm stuck. I was working on it today at home. I got
Well, thank you for bringing up that other information. That was really good. I think it's time to close. So I want to thank our speakers. I want to thank all of you for coming. You could have been doing something else like watching TV. So thank you so much for coming. I also want to encourage you to spread the word about there are such things as Catholic social teachings. And a lot of people don't know them. You might want to share it with your priests. That would be the first place to start. So the other thing I want to say is I want to thank all the Pathways for Justice folks that worked on this. And I want to tell you, we've been doing this for a year, all the Catholic social teachings. There's 7 of them. And we have one more presentation, our last presentation, and that's going to be in June. We don't have a date yet because that committee is meeting soon, but it's on rights and responsibilities. And so we will have details in our bulletin and we will send out to the usual places. So those of you, oh yes, thank you. Another thing is, if you have any spare change, or as Willie Brown used to say, we like things that don't make noise to go in there. If you want to donate to our iftar, please do. And I would like to now, let's talk, yes, wait, Betsy has something, say it, Betsy. Oh, evaluation. Also pick up an evaluation because we like to know what we did right and what we did wrong. And if you have any ideas for future forums. So thank you all again for coming, and let's pick up our purple closing prayer and we will say this together. Creator God, thank you for providing us with the gift to share our talents. Provide our community, our nation, our world, the fortitude to provide work for all, which is decent and fair. Make us faithful stewards of your creation to enhance the human dignity of our global community. Fill us with your Holy Spirit, that you might work through us to let your justice reign. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, there's you with your own truck. You should